So there were a couple of areas in the webinar that we didn't have time to go into, well, quite a few areas actually, but one of them was about how do you deal with the stigma and the challenges of children and adolescents in certainly the school system especially, and how that then affects them for their future life choices. And this is a major challenge all over the world, but especially within the South African setting. We do have school clinics, and within the school clinics there are medical officers, psychologists and social workers. They're incredibly overburdened. But this, with the IGAP, we hope would be able to upskill them and provide them with better resources to try and target and support children and adolescents who have epilepsy, to ensure that they can help and guide the teachers, and especially with the teacher support team within each of the schools, to make sure that children with epilepsy are not disadvantaged, but in fact are empowered to have every opportunity that they're entitled to and not held back or disadvantaged because they have this label of this disease, epilepsy, and also to empower all engaged people to make sure that they can actually make the choices that they want to make, and to talk to them about career choices that they might choose and whether they would be viable, whether there would be possibilities, and to help guide them to make sure that they're not held back in what they want to do. So that's one major area, and it's encompassed in a few lines here. It's in fact a major undertaking. One of the other areas is getting a diagnosis and getting the correct diagnosis. And this really steps into the field of precision medicine, because if you have an answer, an actual accurate answer, then it undoubtedly leads to targeted therapy. And we know that with targeted therapy, early intervention, and this goes beyond the medicines, this includes the correct schooling, the correct support with rehabilitation, the correct insight about how a child learns, what they understand, the whole guidance about their lifestyle, of how they sleep and how they eat, and to actually direct families to be able to be empowered about how to optimize the care for their child, their affected child. So some areas we can do well in South Africa, and usually with access to imaging we can identify structural causes for epilepsy, and that can tell us about which pathway we may be going down to help the child, as well as understanding which areas of the brain may be most affected. But one of the areas that we struggle with the most is for the genetic epilepsies, and we suspect that this may affect up to half of the children that we manage. And in this setting, by not having understanding, this stops us from using particular medicines that may be most effective, and also lays the risk of putting children on medicines that might potentially make their seizures worse. And it's an area that is widely available in resource-equipped settings, but to date has not really come into standard practice. And it's a strong illustration of how, in a resource-limited setting, we lag behind the capacities in resource-equipped settings. So it's another area within the IGAP motivations that we will be trying to get equity for what would be viewed as a gold standard of care. And I would just like to touch on the concept of gold standard of care. What is often discussed is basic level healthcare, and that's okay. The reality is that it's not. That if there is a gold standard of care, be it for diagnosis or management, that in fact this should be what we aim to provide for our children. We may need to make minor adaptations for the local setting, but the reality is that if it's recommended as gold standard, then that is actually what we should be trying to do, and not accepting a basic level or an approach to interventions that we want to provide.